The Satsuma Rebellion, the last stand of the samurai, against the tide of modernizing reforms of the Meiji government. Led by Saigō Takamori, a revered samurai and former imperial advisor, the rebellion originated in its namesake, the Satsuma domain in southern Japan, driven by dissatisfaction with the centralization of power and the disillusion of the samurai class. Despite initial successes, the rebellion faced overwhelming government forces, equipped with modern weaponry and tactics, culminating in the famous Battle of Shiroyama. The defeat of the samurai insurgents signified the end of the samurai era and the establishment of Imperial Japan's modern army. But the spirit of the samurai lives on. Welcome to the channel. If you're coming back, it's good to have you here for another video, and if you're new, it's great to meet you. As always, if you would like to support the channel, links to the Patreon are in description. Otherwise, if you really want to help me out, put a like on the video. That'll help YouTube push me out to a bigger audience. Thank you in advance. And now, without further ado, let's get on to our topic for the day. The Satsuma Rebellion, culminating in the Battle of Shiroyama. In the aftermath of the Meiji Restoration and the Boshin War, Satsuma Province emerged as a crucial player, with many of its samurai ascending to influential roles within the nascent Meiji government. However, the rapid modernization efforts and the ensuing societal transformation began to sow the seeds of discontent among these ranks. Central to the unrest was the dismantling of the samurai's esteemed social status and the erosion of their economic foundations, outcomes that ran counter to their expectations and interests. The changes, encompassing shifts in Japanese culture, language, attire, and overall social norms, were perceived by many within the samurai class as a deviation from the original intent of the Sono Joi, revere the emperor, expel the barbarians, slogan that had galvanized the movement to topple the Tokugawa shogunate. Enter the main character, Saigō Takamori, a distinguished Satsuma leader and an architect of the early policies of the burgeoning Meiji government, who was becoming increasingly disillusioned with that government's trajectory. He was particularly disheartened by an apparent rise in political corruption that was easily observable to anybody who was in its vicinity. This sentiment was captured in the popular imagery of the time, which showed the rebel forces under banners proclaiming Shinsei Kotoku, new government, high morality, reflecting a yearning for a return to a more principled and traditional government. Now, Saigō's disillusionment reached a tipping point during the heated Seikanron debates of 1873, which centered on the proposal of launching a military campaign against Korea. Saigō, advocating for a confrontational stance, proposed an audacious plan where he himself would provoke an incident by traveling to Korea and potentially being assassinated by Korean nationalists. He believed that not only would a conflict with Korea vindicate Japan's military prowess, but it would also provide a dignified avenue for the disaffected samurai to engage in a cause that was worthy of their heritage. However, when the government dismissed the proposal, Saigō, feeling alienated and standing firm in his convictions, resigned from all his governmental posts in a dramatic protest. His departure to Kagoshima was emblematic, followed by a wave of resignations from like-minded samurai of Satsuma within the military and police services, all equally disillusioned by the government's refusal to adopt a more aggressive foreign policy stance, and its departure from the ideals that had initially inspired the overthrow of previous regimes. In an effort to provide sustenance and purpose for the displaced samurai who followed him back to Kagoshima, Saigō founded the Shigaku, a private academy, in 1874. This initiative rapidly expanded, with 132 branches springing up across the prefecture, showcasing the depth of Saigō's influence and the broadness of discontent among the samurai in general. The curriculum at these schools went far beyond the academic, encompassing not only the study of Chinese classics, which was typical of samurai education, but also rigorous physical training. Every student was required to engage in weapons training and receive instruction in military tactics. No exceptions. Strong body, strong mind. It seems quite clear at this point that Saigō was preparing for a possible confrontation. Now, further emphasizing this martial focus, Saigō established an artillery school, which maybe you didn't see if you've watched the film The Last Samurai, which is indeed about that. But it wasn't all just the old-style weapons. He was actually rather committed to modern warfare techniques, albeit with a more traditional philosophy behind them. Now, this educational network morphed into entities that resembled paramilitary political organizations more than just a simple school, and you can see how that would raise more than a few eyebrows. They became centers of samurai re-education and militarization. It just shows the discontent with the Meiji government's policies because they were not short of students. Interestingly, the governor of Satsuma was completely on board with this. Aligning with Saigō's cause, he played a pivotal role in integrating these disaffected samurai into the political fabric of Kagoshima. By appointing them to political offices, he ensured they came to dominate the local government, thereby consolidating Saigō's influence and the samurai's discontent into a formidable political force as well. Such was the extent of Saigō's support and the effectiveness of his institutions that, by the end of 1876, Satsuma's alignment with the central Meiji government was nominal at best. The province of Satsuma had, for all intents and purposes, succeeded from central control, setting the stage for a grand confrontation. Following the 1873 conscription law, Japan restructured its military forces, adopting a system that divided the nation into 6 distinct military districts, mainly for the purposes of conscription. This law mandated a compulsory 7-year term of service, divided into 3 years of active duty, followed by 4 years in the reserves, for those selected through a lottery system. Those not chosen for active service were required to serve 20 years in the national militia, ensuring a broad base of military preparedness across the breadth of the large civilian population. The cavalry arm of the military, considered essential for wartime mobility, comprised of 150 men per squadron. However, logistical challenges in procuring horses suitable for contemporary warfare limited the establishment to a mere 3 squadrons, including one within the Imperial Guard, culminating in a fairly modest total of 450 cavalrymen. The infantry, though, the backbone of Japan's military might, was organized into regiments, each consisting of 3 battalions with 1,088 men, followed by 16 battalion staff, leading to a total force of 45,920 infantrymen spread out across 14 regiments. This structure provided a substantial ground force capable of engaging prolonged engagements. Engineer companies, vital for constructing fortifications and ensuring the mobility of the forces, numbered at 150 men each. With 10 such companies, the engineering corps totaled 1,500 personnel, equipped to support the varied logistical needs of the military. Logistical support was further bolstered by the inclusion of train companies, each comprising 80 men. With 6 companies in total, this division contributed an additional 480 personnel dedicated to ensuring the smooth transit and supply of military material and supplies. Coastal artillery battalions, numbering 9 and each 100 men strong, accounted for a total of 900 men tasked with defending Japan's shores from naval threats. The mobile artillery component was divided into mountain and field gun batteries, with 12 mountain gun batteries staffed by 1,920 men, and 6 field gun batteries comprising 780 men. Each battery was equipped with 12 guns, culminating in a formidable force of 2,700 men and 108 guns, ready to provide crucial fire support. And finally, the Imperial Guard, an elite unit formed from veterans of the pro-imperial factions of the Boshin War, was organized into 2 infantry regiments, totaling 4,384 men, a cavalry squadron of 150, an artillery battalion with 12 guns and 290 men, an engineer company of 150, and a train company of 80. This elite force, totaling 5,054 personnel, served as a model of military organization and a symbol of the Meiji Restoration's martial successes. In response to the growing need for a disciplined and capable force, who were capable of maintaining order, especially locally, the Meiji government in 1871 established the Rasotsu, a police force initially numbering 3,000 men. By the onset of the Satsuma Rebellion in 1877, this force had expanded 6-fold to 18,000 men. Unlike typical police units, the Rasotsu were militarized and actively participated in combat operations throughout the conflict, demonstrating the government's reliance on a variety of forces to quell any rebellions. The sheer consumption of munitions during the rebellion was prodigious, reflecting the intensity and the scale of the fighting. In fact, government forces used an average of 322,000 rounds of ammunition and 1,000 artillery shells each day. It's quite a lot, isn't it? It is certainly a testament to the prolonged and heavy engagements that were characterized in this rebellion. Now, on the other side of things, what were the rebel forces like? Well, Saigō's forces presented a contrasting picture of military organization and capability. By 1877, Saigō's army, though only partially modernized, was structured into 6 infantry battalions, each comprising 200,000 men. These battalions were further divided into 10 companies, with 200 men each, demonstrating somewhat of an attempt to adopt military organization of modern times, despite the ad hoc nature of their formation. However, the rebel forces had a few limitations, and the limitations that they did have were certainly significant. For example, they lacked a cavalry component, which would have offered mobility and tactical advantages, and managed to muster only 200 gunners to operate their assortment of artillery, which included 28 mountain guns, 2 field guns, and 30 mortars. But it doesn't really count for too much if you haven't got the men there to use them, or if the men you do have don't really have any idea of what they're doing. This disparity in organization, training, and equipment underscored the challenges faced by the rebels in confronting the central government's forces, which were becoming increasingly proficient and even more well-equipped following the grand modernization efforts of the Meiji Restoration. Now, back to these private academies. The emergence of Saigō's military schools stirred significant unease within the government. Already wary from handling minor, yet still violent uprisings by samurai in Kyushu, who were essentially going through the same grievances. The potential for revolt by the formidable Satsuma samurai under the leadership of the esteemed and well-regarded Saigō, well, that was starting to make members of the government a little bit panicky, and I suppose you cannot blame them. In December 1876, in response to concerns over growing unrest and subversive activities, the government dispatched police officer Nakahara Hisao, along with 57 others, on a kind of reconnaissance mission to Satsuma. Go and take a look and tell us what they are doing. The mission aimed to gather intelligence. However, it swiftly unraveled when the group was quickly detained and reportedly subjected to rather brutal and frankly impolite torture, leading to their confession that yes, they had indeed been dispatched with orders to assassinate Saigō. Well, we all know about confessions made under torture, how reliable they are. especially when you just keep torturing somebody until they say what you want them to say. Although Nakahara later retracted this confession, the claim had already taken root in Satsuma, and everybody was talking, fueling further discontent and convincing many that an uprising was the only way to defend Saigō, the only way to defend Satsuma, the only way to defend their way of life. In an attempt to preempt the brewing storm, the Meiji government took decisive action in January 1877, deploying a warship to Kagoshima with orders to confiscate the arsenal's stockpiled weaponry. This move, coupled with the discontinuation of the samurai's rice stipends that same year, brought tensions to a breaking point. In a dramatic response, 50 of Saigō's best students launched an assault on the Samuta arsenal, seizing armaments. This act of defiance was swiftly followed by over 1,000 students, who orchestrated raids on naval yards and other weapon storage facilities over the subsequent days. Faced with the unfolding chaos and the success of those bold strikes against government facilities, Saigō Takamori, who had until then remained distant from potential political involvement, found himself compelled to step forward. Despite his initial reluctance, Saigō emerged from semi-retirement, drawn into the leadership role of the rebellion against the central government. In response to this escalating situation, in February of 1877, the Meiji government dispatched Hayashi Tomoyuki, a Home Ministry official, alongside Admiral Kawamura Sumiyoshi, aboard the warship Takao, to assess the turmoil in Satsuma. The governor of Satsuma, Oyama Tsunayoshi, explained rather calmly to the visitors that the uprising was in fact a direct consequence of that alleged assassination attempt on Saigō Takamori, and requested that Admiral Kawamura, who was also Saigō's cousin, by the way, simply come ashore and help diffuse the tension. However, shortly after Oyama's departure, an aggressive attempt was made to board the Takao by a group of small ships laden with armed individuals. This attempt was successfully thwarted. The subsequent day, Hayashi informed Oyama that under such volatile and chaotic conditions, he could not permit Admiral Kawamura to disembark, emphasizing that the assault on the Takao represented a grave offense against the state. Upon Hayashi's return to Kobe on February the 12th, he convened with General Yamagata Arimoto and Ito Hirobumi. The consensus was that military intervention was pretty much necessary at this point. The Imperial Japanese Army would have to be dispatched to Kagoshima if they wanted to prevent rebellion from inspiring similar uprisings in regions of Japan that may harbor sympathies towards Saigō. On that very day, Saigō convened with his close associates, Kirino Toshiaki and Shinohara Kunimoto, declaring his intention to march to Tokyo and seek answers directly from the government. Demonstrating a discerning approach, he decided against enlisting a large number of volunteers, nor did he seek support from other domains. Notably, no contingents were stationed in Kagoshima to defend his stronghold in the event of a counterattack. In a bid to convey a sense of legitimacy, Saigō donned his official army uniform for the march. The journey northward was significantly hindered by an unusually severe snowstorm, the likes of which Satsuma had not witnessed in over 50 years. It's always the one time you go out, isn't it? This extraordinary weather event, mirroring the conditions faced by the forces that had embarked on the Meiji Restoration 9 years prior, was of course interpreted by some within Saigō's ranks as a divine endorsement of the cause. Well, the rebellion escalated when the vanguard of Satsuma's forces entered Kumamoto Prefecture on February 14th. The defense of Kumamoto Castle was under the command of Major General Tani Tateki, who had at his disposal 3,800 soldiers and 600 policemen. However, the loyalty of many in the garrison, composed largely of individuals from Kyushu, and with a considerable number of officers actually hailing from Kagoshima, was uncertain. To avoid the risk of desertion or defection, Tani opted for a defensive strategy. The initial confrontation occurred on February the 19th, with Kumamoto's castle's defenders firing upon Satsuma's units attempting to breach the castle. Constructed in 1598, Kumamoto Castle was one of Japan's most formidable fortresses, so this was not going to be easy. But despite this, Saigō was confident his forces could overcome Tani's conscripts, who were perceived to be demoralized following the recent Shinpuren rebellion that they had to deal with. The arrival of Satsuma's main force on February 22nd marked the real escalation, as they launched a coordinated assault on Kumamoto Castle. The engagement extended into the night, during which the Imperial forces were pushed back, with Acting Major Nogi Maresuke of the Kokura 14th Regiment notably losing the regimental colors amidst the intense conflict. Despite initial advances, Satsuma's army was unable to capture the castle, leading them to reassess the effectiveness of the conscript army. After 2 days of unsuccessful assaults, Satsuma's troops entrenched themselves in the frozen terrain surrounding the castle, initiating a siege in an attempt to starve out the defenders. This situation was particularly dire for the garrison, given that their food and ammunition supplies had already been compromised by a warehouse fire prior to the onset of the rebellion. Throughout the siege, numerous ex-samurai from Kumamoto joined up with Saigō's forces, increasing his numbers to around 20,000 men. Well, in response to all this, the Meiji government decided that they would take decisive action against Saigō and his closest associates. So, a fortnight later, Saigō Takamori, Kirino Toshiaki, and Shinohara Kunimoto were officially stripped of their court ranks and titles. The turning point in the siege occurred on the night of April 8th, when a sortie from Kumamoto Castle breached the Satsuma lines, allowing essential supplies to be delivered to the beleaguered garrison. The situation for Satsuma's forces worsened with the arrival of the main imperial army, led by General Kuroda Kiyotaka, with support from General Yamakawa Hiroshi on April the 12th. This reinforcement forced the outnumbered Satsuma rebels to retreat. Sometime later, on March 4th, General Yamagata of the Imperial Army commanded a direct attack on Taburazaka, a strategic point that defended the routes to Kumamoto. This confrontation escalated into an extensive battle that lasted for 8 days, involving around 15,000 samurai from Satsuma, Kumamoto, and Hitoyoshi, facing off against the Imperial Army's 9th Infantry Brigade, which numbered around 9,000 soldiers. At one critical moment during this battle, Saigō sent a private letter to Prince Arisugawa, reiterating his motivations for proceeding towards Tokyo. Through this correspondence, Saigō expressed a desire for a peaceful resolution, signaling his reluctance to engage in open rebellion. But, despite this gesture, the government remained unwilling to enter into negotiations. In a strategic move to isolate Saigō from his support base, the imperial government dispatched a force comprising of 3 warships, 500 policemen, and multiple infantry companies to Kagoshima on March the 8th. This force quickly took control of key arsenals and detained the governor of Satsuma. Furthermore, General Yamagata deployed a force consisting of 2 infantry brigades and 1,200 policemen to land behind enemy lines via Yutsushiro Bay, aiming to launch a surprise attack on the Satsuma forces from the rear. The imperial troops landed with minimal losses and quickly advanced northward, capturing the city of Miyanohara on March 19th. Upon receiving additional forces, the imperial contingent, now strengthened to 4,000 troops, engaged Satsuma's army's rear guard and forced them into retreat. The Battle for Tabaruzaka stands as one of the conflict's fiercest engagements, culminating in an imperial victory, albeit a very hard-fought one. The victory came at a great cost, with both sides incurring over 4,000 casualties, including both dead and wounded. Following an unsuccessful attempt to capture Kumamoto Castle, Saigō and his forces retreated to Hitoyoshi, where they spent 7 days of low morale, and without a clear plan. They simply waited for the next assault by the Imperial Army. The Imperial forces, having also suffered these significant losses, paused the fighting for a period to allow reinforcement and recovery. But didn't last long. When hostilities resumed, Saigō retreated further to Miyazaki, leaving small groups of samurai scattered in the hills to conduct guerrilla warfare operations against the imperial troops. By July the 24th, the Imperial Army managed to push Saigō's forces out of Miyakanojo, and subsequently out of Nobeoka, executing a strategic encirclement by landing additional troops at Oita and Saiki, north of Saigō's position. Despite being trapped in a pincer maneuver, Saigō's army succeeded in breaking free from the encirclement, albeit with more significant losses. By the 17th of August, Saigō's forces were severely depleted, numbering only 3,000 fighters, and they were stripped of most of their modern weaponry and all of their artillery pieces. The reduced band of rebels made their final stand on the slopes of Mount Enodake, where they were quickly besieged by a much larger imperial force with a numerical advantage of 7-1. Facing overwhelming odds, many of Saigō's men surrendered or committed Sudoku. Saigō, in a symbolic gesture, destroyed his private documents and military attire on August 19th and managed to escape with approximately 500 of his remaining followers, moving back towards Kagoshima. Despite the concerted efforts of General Yamagata to capture him, Saigō and his loyalists reached Kagoshima by the 1st of September, taking a defensive position on Shiroyama, a hill overlooking the city. This act set the stage for the final confrontation of the rebellion. In the conclusive Battle of Shiroyama, taking place in Kagoshima, Saigō Takamori and his dwindled force of samurai made their last stand against the vastly superior imperial force. General Yamagata Arimoto's troops, complemented by Admiral Kawamura Sumiyoshi's marines, heavily outnumbered the rebels, establishing a 60-1 ratio against them. Despite the overwhelming odds, Yamagata meticulously prepared for the assault, constructing a network of ditches, walls, and barriers to prevent any possibility of a rebel breakout. The Imperial Navy's presence in Kagoshima harbor further tightened the noose around the rebels, with warships bombing Saigō's positions in conjunction with Yamagata's artillery, effectively dismantling the samurai's final defenses. When Saigō dismissed a surrender request conveyed through a letter from Yamagata, penned by the young Suematsu Kensho on September the 1st, Yamagata saw no alternative but to launch a decisive attack on the 24th of December, 1877. The battle concluded by morning, leaving only 40 rebels alive, among them a critically injured Saigō. According to the legend, in his final moments, Saigō was assisted in performing Sudoku by Beppu Shinsuke, ensuring his death would come by his own hand rather than from his injuries or capture by enemy forces. This account, however, is contested by other historical sources that suggest Saigō may have succumbed to his gunshot wound, with Beppu then taking his head to maintain his honor. Following Saigō's death, Beppu and the remaining samurai, who were unwilling to surrender, charged towards the enemy lines, embracing their inevitable demise. Their deaths marked the end of the Satsuma Rebellion, and the closing of a significant chapter in Japan's transition into modernity, and the consolidation of the Meiji government's power, of course. Now, The financial burden of quelling the Satsuma Rebellion was more than a little costly. It cost a staggering 420 million yen, which was around 8 million pounds at the time, which had significant repercussions on the nation's economy, of course. I mean, that is a huge strain. The strain was so severe that it compelled Japan to abandon the gold standard, resorting instead to issuing paper currency to manage this new fiscal crisis. In response to the economic downturn triggered by the rebellion, the government enacted the Act of February 4th, 1877, which lowered the land tax rate from 3% to 2.5%, aiming to alleviate at least some of the financial pressures. Well, the rebellion's cost had more far-reaching implications than that, drastically reducing Japan's annual government expenditure from £13 million to about £10 million, while simultaneously escalating the national debt from £28 million to, wait for it, 70. To mitigate some of the financial distress, the Meiji government was compelled to divest state-owned enterprises, including factories and mines, selling them at reduced prices to individuals with political connections and former officials. This move led to the rapid de-establishment of large-scale industrial conglomerates known as zaibatsu. The aftermath of the rebellion also saw the emergence of right-wing groups, such as the Genyosha and the Kokuryukai, from the remnants of the militaristic faction that had initially supported Saigō Takamori's aggressive stance towards foreign policy. The rebellion also heralded the end of the samurai class, demonstrating the superiority of a modern conscripted army equipped with artillery and rifles over the traditional samurai warfare. The futility of the Banzai charge against modern firepower underscored a critical turning point in Japanese military strategy, and it certainly makes a rather poetic end to the samurai. Well, to finish up, on the 22nd of February 1889, in a gesture of reconciliation, Emperor Meiji posthumously pardoned Saigō Takamori, acknowledging his contributions and the complexity of his legacy. Memorials in Ueno Park, Tokyo, and near Kagoshima Castle ruins commemorate Saigō, and you can visit them today. He's been enshrined in the public consciousness as a kind of tragic hero, embodying the virtues of Bushido and Yamato Damashi, symbolizing the spirit of Japan. Thank you very much for listening. I'd like to thank my Patreon top-tier subscribers. That's Jeffrey, JC, and Stark Factory. Thank you very much, lads. If you would like to support the Patreon, you know what to do. But until next time, thank you very much for listening. And I will see you in the next video. Good night, everyone.